Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We are beginning our journey on Confucius Analects. And the way we are going to do this, in the first few of these meetups, we are going to experiment. The way we are going to do this is we're going to have one reading of each of the books. So the chapter is divided into about 16. The first chapter is divided into 16 books. We're going to go chapter by chapter. Within the chapter, we're just going to do first book, so 1.1. David will be reading the first one. Anybody else who wants to volunteer to read, you're welcome to type exclamation mark. Jason, do you think it is a good idea to have two? Because it is very short, let's try two.
Yeah, let's try two, yeah, or something like that.
We'll go from that. So this time it'll be David followed by Connie, reading just chapter 1.1. So chapter 1, book 1. And after that, if anybody has comments, try to keep their comments short in the beginning. So comments or questions, you can put them down. Then Jason is going to go through his translation of 1.1. After that, if there are any questions, we'll do that. Then we'll move to 1.2. Okay, so that's the plan. Let's get started. David, would you get us started?
Yes, indeed. I am using a recent translation by Moss Roberts from 2020, University of California Press. A1, learning pursued. Our master said, learning pursued persistently and applied when timely. Is that not inspiring? And the great gathering of friends coming from afar, is that not occasion for song and celebration? But to remain unprovoked though unrecognized by others, now that is truly princely. Wouldn't you agree?
Thank you. Connie, could you do the same?
Yes. That sounded like it was both 1 and 2, was it? Because my 1 is quite a bit shorter. But I will read 1. The master said, is it not pleasant to learn with a constant perseverance and application? And then 2, is it not delightful to have friends coming from distant quarters?
Okay, you know what, Jason, go ahead.
There's another one. There's another verse, Connie.
Connie, go
You
ahead.
want me to read one more?
Yeah, there's one more line.
Okay, 3. 3 is in my book. Is he not a man of complete virtue who feels no discomposure, though men may take no note of him?
Wonderful. Jason, let's just go with your translation. Let's try that. You can go ahead and talk about your translation, and then we will take questions and comments on this one. Go
okay,
ahead.
so let's do this way. Okay, I'm going to share my screen now. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I heard the David talk about truly princely, and then Connie talk about the gentleman of virtue. Okay, so I will have some explanation here. Okay, so I use the original Chinese name 君子, okay, which means in David's version is truly princely, and in Connie's version is the gentleman of virtue. Because the reason I keep the word 君子 is because that's a very special word in Chinese Confucianism. It's kind of like a role model of the man. So you will hear this word, I will call it 君子 many, many, many times because it's the role model and you try to achieve this kind of thing. So I want to keep the original name. So, okay, you can in your mental exercise to change to whatever name you want to call it, but just keep in mind that's Confucius, the moral agent. Okay, and okay, so I'm going to read for this short course. The master said, to learn and then have chance to practice what you learned. Is that not a pleasure? To have followers come from afar, is this not a joy? Not to be indignant when others do not appreciate, is this not like a 君子? Okay, so that's the probably I go a little bit explanation, okay, in my understanding, and then, so this one is the book 1 verses 1, and I think they have the reason to put this one on the very first one, because that's Confucius is talking about his lifetime, okay, his so-called achievement. Even we know he is a failed politician. He tried to get a job, but in 3-4 years get fired. Okay, so but he is talking about his life. So the first sentence he's talking about to learn and then have a chance to practice what you have learned. Okay, we all know Confucius learned a lot and he's happy. It's a pleasure. He has a chance, okay, to practice what he have learned. That's the first thing he's talking about. Second thing, a lot of translation, because the word "peng" usually considered as a friend, but I will, not only me, a lot of people will consider the "peng" doesn't mean friend, it means the follower, because maybe means his disciple, because he's talking about he practice, he apply what he learned, and have a lot of followers come from afar, because at that time it's a warring state. There's many kingdom, and a lot of people coming together to join Confucius to do this one. So he thinks that's a joy. Okay, and the number 3, he talked about since he failed in his political career, so he talking about he never get angry or indignant when other people not appreciate what he is promoting. Okay, so he still consider that's a Jun's style. He just do whatever he want to do. So if you put these 3 together, that kind of summarize what Confucius' lifetime. He feel comfortable and he feel proud of what he's doing. So that's what I like to say for now. And then I don't want to be like, question, just a question. I open any kind of interpretation, disagreement, and then anybody have offer his own. I know some people know Chinese here, and you have your own explanation, your understanding. That'd be wonderful. And I also like to know, for my personal interest, how does you read? What do you get? Okay, from this verse. Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful. So folks, now it's your turn. Please go ahead. Any comments you have on this verse, go ahead and type an exclamation mark. If you would like to make any comment, what did you learn from it? What do you think of it? If you have any question about it, we're going to start with Amon.
Well, good evening. It's good to be back and to see everybody. And I wanted to say, first of all, the opening of the Analects is kind of a miniature summary of the whole of the Analects. It possesses this autobiographical characteristic, which Jason was talking about, where it denotes a lot of Confucius' own life, but there are elements in it that really are repeated again and again throughout the Analects. The idea of learning. In fact, the title of the chapter, Shue'er, is those first 2 characters, learning and, you could almost say, which isn't a very clear title, but you could take that as the crowning philosophy of Confucianism, to learn and then ... And in this case, to learn and then apply. Isn't that indeed a pleasure? To have friends come from afar, isn't that indeed a joy? So we go right from learning into a social element, and this idea that learning and interacting with people should be of themselves a good. And then that last line where he says to a junsa does not get dissuaded or despair at disregard or disrespect from others. these really are the foundational ideas of what later becomes Confucianism. And it's all set out right in the very beginning so that a whole lot of meaning is meant to be packed into a very terse set of lines. I think that, the Analects is a denser text than what we tackled last time, but I'm enjoying hearing the translations and seeing everybody's feedback on it.
Wonderful. Just one question for either Aman or Jason. Could you talk a little bit more about this junsu and why in most translations it is not translated, but it is used as is?
I mean, why keep the word 君子 not translated?
Yes.
Okay, I need some explanation. Okay, so 君子, this word basically is a title. During the Confucius time, it's a title because at that time is a warring state. They have the feudalist system. So they have the highest, the emperor, they have the king, prince, blah, 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 lord, and the lowest aristocracy is so-called 君子. Okay, so usually they are doing the administration job. Then they have a bunch of the commoner. So they have the gap between 君子 and the commoner. So the idea is this. Another word we will run into is so-called 礼. Okay, so the richer. Another word will come with punishment or legal. So usually the aristocratic level, the people will not be punished by law. They just governed, controlled by the so-called richer. And the commoner will be governed by law, be punished. Okay, so Confucius' idea is this. He is the lower ranking aristocrat, so he's kind of 君子. He wants everybody, the commoner, become 君子. Okay, so he redefined this title. Okay, instead of the title in blood, he wants this one become in virtue. So you don't have to have highly the blue blood to become 君子. If you meet certain criteria, you will become 君子. So we will see this one probably 100 times, okay, in the Analect. So just keep in mind, okay. And then another way to understand is opposite of 君子. What's the opposite? So-called small man. I'm going to translate as a small man, okay. But remember, small man is not necessarily bad people. You just not reach the level of 君子. So in another way, you are the commoner. Okay, so it's still subject to the punishment. Unlike 君子, you are subject to the richer, okay, so-called. So that's I have to talk about here. Thank you.
Aman.
If I could add to that, I think, Jason, you're absolutely right. As far as translating into English terms, when this was originally translated into English a couple hundred years back, the closest equivalent was the idea of the refined gentleman. And so you will still see that sort of antiquated term of gentleman sometimes used in translation. Other scholars like to update the term to be more universalized and less of an anachronism. So they'll say something like the exemplary person or the person of stature. There is a similar concept that works parallel within Western society, and that is the bachelor. When somebody finishes undergrad, they are granted a bachelor's degree, but that was because they were then, once upon a time, a member of polite society who was eligible and on the market, as it were, for a respectable marriage suggestion. There's a similarity in the idea of obtaining your bachelorhood, that it wasn't something you were merely born with, you had to actually earn, but you could be born closer, nearer the mark, as it were. And I think in that, there's something very similar to, not that they're identical, but Confucius' idea of the zhuanzi versus the, the peasantry or the small man or plebeian.
Wonderful. I want to just say that I'm just comparing the start of this Analects to the start of Tao Te Ching. Tao Te Ching is all about nature and kind of core, kind of, it is metaphysical, whereas this is social. This is focused on the nature of society and just trying to identify the core premises there. So wonderful. Next up is Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Sranka and Jason, among everybody else. Wow, that's a new chapter of analytics. We're back to the ground, talk to human beings, social society. I'm going to follow Zhongzi. Zhongzi can be referred to a person with a high moral cultivation, or we direct called a virtuous person. I just learned like also English. This bachelor can be that meaning, right? Like this kind. Now bachelor, we reduce something virtue. Bachelor, right? Single, not married. So that's a common trend from west to east. I would say some meaning have deeply virtue related. We just missed. I'm going to comment this one. You want me to read Chinese?
Yes, that would
Then,
be,
yeah.
please.
子曰：学而时习之，不亦说乎？有朋自远方来，不亦乐乎？人不知而不慙，不亦君子乎？ Three question marks we added to, yeah. For me, the first question mark about learning, then practice. It's a beautiful thing. It's happiness, and not just practice what you learn, also apply to the reality. And the second one, generally maybe modern translation, they should be, if an easy understand way, modern translation is if our friends come from far away, it's a joy, it's joyful. So that's always welcome. We normally warm-hearted, right? And the third question about this one is a different meaning translation. The person doesn't know, not get angry. The first that person, I would say that person, that word is so important, called yung. No hate, no angry. That's we call it Zhongzi. That's I would say try use that word. It's keep original meaning. If you see Zhongzi, we get used to it. By the way, it's two words. Zhong is about virtue related. Zi, this is respect, like a Kongzi. We respect the Kongzi, and Laozi is respectful because they have their wisdom, knowledge, and we respect. I'm pause here. Thank you, listening.
Thank you, Kevin. Now I'm assuming that Joe and Will have typed exclamation mark to read. What we'll do is let's do the convention R for reading and exclamation mark for comments or questions. So let's go to the next one. That's going to be 1.2. Let's start with Joe.
So 1.2, the philosopher Yu said, there are few who, being philia and fraternal, are found of offending against their superiors. There have been none who, not liking to offend against their superiors, have been found of stirring up confusion. The superior man bends his attention to what is radical. That being established, all practical courses naturally grow up. Filial piety and fraternal submission, are they not the root of all benevolent actions?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next reading is going to be by Will. Will, if you could read 1.2.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. My translation says, Master Yo says, those who are filial to their parents and compliant with their elders hardly defy their superiors. Those who hardly defy their superiors, but like to cause disorder, do not exist. The noble person works on the root. Only when the root takes firm hold will the way grow. Thus are filial piety and respect for elders the root of humanity.
Wonderful. Amon, would you like to read 1.2?
Yeah, I've got a translation here. I have to actually look up the translator. Professor Robert Andrew Lafar. And let me get back there. I'm sorry, I had to lose my place to find his name. My computer's running just a touch slow, so forgive me. Here we go. 1.2. Master Yo said, "Rare indeed is the person of filial and fraternal conduct, who yet enjoys defying his superiors." Excuse me. And among those not inclined to defy authority, there has never been one who incited rebellion. Exemplary people focus upon the roots. Once the roots are established, the way will grow and spread. As for filial and fraternal conduct, they are, I suspect, the root of all consummate conduct.
Wonderful.
So very interesting translation of Ren.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Amon. Next up is Jason.
Yeah, Among, what's the translation they use for Ren? I missed it.
Consummate conduct.
Consummate conduct. Okay. So, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So again, I think at the beginning would be difficult, okay, because there's a lot of term, and I decided not to translate, okay, because it appears so many times, so I have to keep the original pronunciation. So one is 君子, you already face. Another one is just Among said Ren, okay, so. Analect only have 10,000 characters, but Ren, this word appear more than 100 times. So the translation would be very difficult. So I would like to keep the original word Ren, which in general means benevolence, humaneness, okay, and everything good. We can call it the Ren. Okay, so that's like another word is Xiao. We translate as the filiality or filial piety. Okay, so that's how you treat your parent. I think filial piety probably a little bit mistranslation, because I think in English, filial piety probably means the mutual relation between you and your parent to you. But in the Chinese word, xiao is specifically for son or daughter to your father. Okay, so it's not mutual. That's only one way. So that's why I believe filial piety may not 100% correct, only 50% correct. So I would like to translate as keep the original word 孝. Okay, so here I like to translate in this way. 游子, okay, some translation called Master Yo, because you see the 子 here. So that means 游子 is Confucius student, and the person who writes this sentence is Mr. Yo's student. So he respect his teacher is 游子. So like whenever you see 子 at the end, it's very possible. It's written, this sentence is written by his student. So 游子 said, it is rare for one who practices filial piety, which I call 孝, and respect the elders, but has an inclination to defy his superior. It is unheard of for one who has no inclination to defy his superior, but has an inclination to rebel. 君子 apply himself to the root. Once the root is firmly established, the Tao, okay, that's called the way. Okay, I keep the word Tao. The Tao will come forth. Therefore, xiao and the respect are the root of ren. So here it's a little bit difficult to go through all the words, but the logic here is this. The two words, xiao, filial piety, and the ti, which is respect for the elder. Remember why they put these two words together. Think about you are in the house in the ancient time. When we say a family, usually it doesn't mean you and your wife and your son, your daughter, like 4 or 5 people. They talk about big house with, I don't know, 100 of people. So inside the house, okay, you have to practice xiao, which is filial piety. When you go outside your house, you have to practice so-called ti, is so-called respectful to the elder. So that's the two things you have to remember. So that's the very fundamental thing. So he said, the Youzi said, which he is repeat what Confucius taught him. Okay. So as a person, right, it's hardly happen if you are doing xiao, filial piety inside the house and respectful when you go outside. This kind of person, usually they will not defy his superior. Okay, so remember that's at the social order. And if the person is never defy his superior, he will never have to go rebel. Okay, so this go logic, right? You do it well in the house and outside, you will always follow your superior. If you follow your superior, you will never rebel. Remember, during the spring and autumn, for the kingdom, especially in the royal family, they have a lot of rebel, killing, all these kinds of happen. So for the ruler, that's a big concern is to avoid the rebel. Okay, so I think that's Confucius is promoting. If you start from the very fundamental, which is respect your being filial piety to your parent, respectful to the elder when you go outside, then everything will be fine. So that's Confucius' moral sense. So that's why he said xiao and the ti, the filial piety and the respectfulness is the fundamental of ren. Okay, ren is another virtue he's talking about. Okay, benevolence. So that's this paragraph.
Thank you, Jason. So folks, any comments or questions on this one? We'll start with Amon.
Yes, I wanted to invite everyone to have a hermeneutic for this. When we read the Tao Te Ching, we were reading advice to a ruler. So teachers' notes when speaking to a princeling who has power. Confucius was speaking to people without power from a position of authority as their teacher. And what you get in the Analects are the loose notes of students that do not necessarily seem to have any direct cohesion, because we just went from Confucius as the narrator to Yaozi as the voice through which the next lesson is delivered. But in 1, 2, 3, probably the first 5 stanzas or sections of book 1, a syllabus is being laid out. And if you view this like it were a classroom syllabus, what we had first in that 1.1 is here's the broad topics of study. In section 1.2, we're getting, and here is classroom conduct. You will respect the authority, you will respect the elder. And that was led into by the very last line of 1.1. It's often a little more uncomfortable for people not raised in Confucian societies to see this sort of blatant hierarchy being set out. And there's no argument that it is this section and this idea that has attracted Confucianism to so many leaders, because it's very easy to read it superficially as do what you're told from the top down. But there is a reciprocity, I do believe, even if Shao doesn't necessarily denote that, there is an idea of that have friends come from afar, a mutual respect for who is involved. And you see this replete throughout Eastern culture, the respect for well-defined hierarchy and an appreciation for when it is laid out clearly. All right, I am your superior, I am your inferior, I now know my place. I don't have to have the ambiguity of who's more important. There's a real appreciation for that in a lot of traditional Eastern culture. But that having been said, I do think 1, 2, and 3 really do form sort of the central corpus of here's the study that we're going to undertake. And if these are class notes, it's not going to be always smooth ideas leading one into the next, like a analytical philosophical argument from the West. It's going to be the highlight reels, brought up once, brought up again. So that sort of staccato and jolting pace of the Analects can put some people off, but I think it's actually kind of enduring.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amon. Jason.
Oh yeah, I welcome to not only question, and if you have any thought on this one, either disagree or agree, disagree, and what to learn. I think that would be very interested to know, how does the people in different culture read this one, and what your reaction?
Wonderful. Folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to comment on anything. Kevin.
Yeah, thank you. This passage is very connected to Jason, father. That's the passage is about the show, and also this 1:11 also talk about what's the show. I'm going to quickly read the English the show. In Chinese, show is the master said. When your father is alive, observe his will. When your father is passed away, observe the formal actions. If for 3 years you don't change from the ways your father, you can be called a xiao, a real son. So that's I would see Jason heard that, so probably what do you do now? I guess yeah, that's the first I want to say. Second one, yeah, it's about the show, and then in Chinese is one left side is person plus 2, which how do you not just yourself, how do you work with your parents, outsider? If you can work with your parents fine, outsider you would be good. You're not going to rebel for the country, and the root of I'm going to find my translation here. Sorry. My translation would be, I'm going to read out here. There are few who have developed themselves fidelity and fraternity, who enjoy offending their superiors. Those who don't enjoy offending superiors are never troublemakers. The noble man concerns himself with fundamentals. Once the fundamentals are established, the proper way appears. Are not affiliated piety and obedience to elders fundamental to the actualization of fundamental human goodness. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kevin. Appreciate that. Next up is going to be Joe, Brian, and Marilyn. Joe.
Yes, and I was actually thinking about what Kevin had read as well. But what I take from this particular verse is obviously the importance of loyalty to one's family more than anything else. And that comes with that is a whole host of other things, like a reverence for tradition and for kind of a way of essentially like rules that you're going to live by that gear exactly all your actions. So I think that you start to see this a structure take place where it almost becomes a little dogmatic, and to me, and so I think that that's where you can't, if you're not doing this, you're no longer virtuous, and that can be a challenge sometimes. And I kind of see that, and I know that Confucius was kind of trying to follow the way, but I don't see that as being in accordance with the way, whereas you're living through nature. I guess you can argue maybe nature is your family, but I don't know if anybody has a comment on that.
Jason or Amon?
Yeah, I'd like to comment. I totally agree with you. That's first, I agree with you. It's dogmatic. Okay, basics. That's a Confucius said. Okay, and because his purpose is to preserve the social order from the family to the when you go outside to your colleague, I assume, and to your boss. Okay, and to the president. So the whole country, the whole world will be peaceful. That's the Confucius idea. You agree or disagree? That's another issue. That's what he wants to talk about. Second thing, Joe talked about the Tao. Yes, it's different. So I just like to remind everyone, Tao is every school philosophy, they talk about Tao, but their Tao, the Taoism's Tao, and the Confucius talk about Tao is different. So when he said so-called, if you establish your rule, the Tao is going to follow. Okay, the Tao is his Tao is not talking about Lao Tzu or Dao De Jing. He says as long as the Tao happened, that's the good thing. Okay, Confucius, you will see many times he talk about Tao. But if you try to match with Dao De Jing's Tao, you will say, that's wrong. But we don't know. That's different school.
Jason, just a follow-up question. How would you describe the difference between the Tao of Confucius and Tao of Lao Tzu?
Let me make it simple this way, okay? In Taoism's Tao, basics is nameless. There's no name. There's only one. Okay, I just make it simple. Confucius, the Tao, definitely they have the name. Okay, the name is very important. You will see so-called the rectification of name because everything got the name. They have the many Tao, not only one Tao. They come with a big Tao, but as a emperor, you have your own Tao. As a father, you have a father's Tao. As a son, you have the son's Tao. So let's say Confucius and the Laos, they are looking at the same thing called Tao, but they are thinking in a different way. Laozi say, that's no name. If you name it, it comes. Okay, so it's vague. It's something very high. That's one. Okay, everything grow from that. Tao generated 2, 2 will generate 3, 3 will have all things. Confucius look at the same Tao, but he talk about different things. They have the name, correct name, rectification of name. That's important. Okay, and remember, you are not God. You are father, so you have follow father's Tao. You also a son, follow son's Tao. If you are also husband, follow husband's style. If you are wife, follow wife's style. So many Taos all come together. So that's the way they view it.
Thank you. Amon, what do you think?
I just wanted to back up what Jason was saying. And mention that there is an intimation of it a little later. I believe he's talking to, and I could be wrong, but I believe it's like chapter 9 or so, where he's talking to one of his students, and I think it's Jung Hee, who is asking about what you won't tell us about, the afterlife, and you won't tell us about, and he says, you can't serve the living. How can you know how to follow the way of the dead? And he says, but you aren't telling us about the universe. He says, you can't follow the ways of earth. How can you know the ways of heaven? He's aware that there are broader connotations to the idea of Tao. They don't interest him. And I would liken it to how multiple uses of a term like justice can be thrown about in the English language with very different meanings to the people who are using them, even if they are denoting a very similar thing.
Wonderful. This is amazing. Let me just ask one more question here, because I think this is because we've been studying Tao Te Ching. So the Tao in Tao Te Ching is one. I think Jason made that point. It's one. The Tao here, it's off the 10,000 things. It is off like a category of 10,000, something like that. Amon, what would you say?
Well, Tao could be used in very specific terms, and even Lao Tzu would say that opening line, Tao ke Tao, Fei Cheng Tao. The Tao that can be Taoed is not the Tao, capital T. And so he recognized there were lots of different ways of going about things, and lots of different manners in which people would call this the way of fill in the blank. Kong Tzu, Master Kong, is concerned with the way of people, society, how humans make the world around them. And therein lies probably the fundamental difference, that Kong Tzu really did believe it was within the power of the human to orchestrate and create the world in which they lived. Taoists thought that was something of a bit of hubris and a fool's errand. I will say, just on a historical note, Confucius won. Because the Chinese adopted Confucianism wholesale and constructed their society very intentionally for thousands of years. So in the very obvious sense, it's easy to say Confucius won. Out of the 100 schools, it was the one that won the battle. How do you govern people with this system? But Taoism was a good second runner up, and definitely kept nipping at the heels to keep it honest. So
wonderful. Thank you. Jason, did you have a point? Go ahead.
Yeah. Just respond to what Aman said. Who won the battle? We don't know. It depends on how you define, right? So
fair enough. Fair
turn
enough.
out the legalism won the battle because the Qing dynasty, they unite. Okay, so it's on. And I like Aman's example as justice. I think that's a perfect example, right? When we talk about justice, some people will say that's fairness. Okay, we have to be fair. Some people say that's reward and the punishment. The bad people got to be punished. Some people will say, okay, that's the social order. Everybody should in the right place. If I work hard, I get more. If I don't work hard, I get less. If I'm smarter, I get more. So everybody has a different idea of the justice. Same as in Chinese, ancient Chinese, everybody have a different concept of Tao. But if you are not following Tao, you are bad. That's all agree. Same as in Western world, if it's injustice, okay, it's not good. Nobody agree that. Even people disagree on what the meaning of justice.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jason. And thank you, Amon. Next up is Brian. Brian, go ahead.
First of all, I'd say, already this is wonderful. I have to say, having all three of you here, Jason, Amon, and Kevin, I really have appreciated Kevin's interventions. my thoughts are just on this Tao. I'm not asking anybody to agree or disagree, but it sounds like there's just a different emphasis between them, and the Tao of Tao Te Ching is different from the Tao of Confucius, in that in Confucianism, they're talking about different inflections or the different faces of Tao as it manifests itself in commonly occurring patterns, and a very commonly occurring pattern is the family. It's whether or not it's very conservative or very progressive. I think it's still up in the air. I think it is, at least based on the two verses I've heard. We'll hear more. Jason's kind of put a question mark on that. And so it must be a topic of discussion. So far, it sounds to me like he's just against rebellion. And specifically, I guess, the in-house or palace revolts, sounds like. And so he's not necessarily against change or reform within the context of some continuity within, if you will, the government or the ruling arrangement. I do have a question, because there's been, people have thrown around, I think, different terms. One is respect for the elder, and the other is respect for the father. And I think that the implications and outcome of that are very different, especially with regards to the role of the wife and the mother, the woman. So am I right about that? Is there some have said clearly father, and some have said parents, and some have said elders. To me, it would make a difference. Let me just add that because I've been reading about goddess worship and the divine feminine in preparation for a few presentations, the divine feminine is one of its roles is intergenerational. She really serves the purpose of passing, it's really hard to put in a few words, but passing power from the father to the son. And so the role of the woman here is important in that regard. So I just was wondering, are we talking about respect for fathers or respect for elders and parents?
Thank you. Jason or Ramon? Jason, go ahead.
I think, please correct me, I don't think in the Analect Confucius mentioned the mother by itself. Okay, talk about father, mother together. Okay, but most I talk about father. So by strict definition, xiao means father and the mother. Okay, so a lot of criticize, that's a little bit about Chinese tradition. People criticize Chinese has no female right. Okay, but it's not 100% correct. Okay, because the female doesn't have a right, that's correct. But as long as you are a mother, you have the superpower on that. So the mother do have right. So there's no female right, but they have a strong mother right, because the xiao, okay, the xiao, the filial piety, Confucius is preaching here. Okay, but because he's mother, not because he's a female, because he's a mother. That's why she got the power. So,
thank you. Next up is going to be Marilyn, Will, and Kevin. Marilyn.
Yes, thank you, Jason and Aman and Shrikant. My question is about the word shao. I believe that the word shao in Chinese, there's a word pronounced like that also means small. And I'm wondering if this is the same word, and if not, if it's pronounced the same and would have that connotation for a Chinese speaker.
Okay, xiao and xiao, okay, that's a different tone. Okay, so xiao means small. Okay, xiao means that's the one, xiao and the xiao. Okay, if you can tell the difference, that's small. But xiao is similar to another word, it means laugh. Okay, so people would make joke on the xiao as laugh. Okay, that's the modern day. Okay, and for the immigrant, I heard when I was in Taiwan, people in the older generation, they immigrant to America and they come back, they surprised. They cannot find the English word for xiao. So they think America is strange because that's such an important word and we cannot find the word in America. So I think that's how it's different. Yeah.
Wonderful. I'm always scared to try to pronounce Chinese because I don't know what I'm going to be saying because I get the tones wrong and I'm saying something completely different. Next up is going to be Will, followed by Kevin. Will.
Hey, the commentary that I read had a really interesting take on this, and it was that xiao and ren, or filial piety and benevolence, were the same thing, just one was universal and one was particular. And so it was the root came in is that where do you start? You want to have the universal thing as your ultimate goal, benevolence, but you start with your parents. And so I thought that was interesting. I actually really like that interpretation. I'm sure it's one of many, but also I guess I have a question. What do you think of the word root, and what is your interpretation of it? Thanks.
So let me answer first. Sorry, because I like this word, and thank you, Will. I like your expression as a xiao, as a small, as the beginning, and the ren become more universal. Technically, it's wrong, but I think that's a very good explanation. And then because in the Taoism will say ren is not universal, but forget about this. But I just keep in mind. That's correct so far, because xiao is specific to your family, ren is more universal. And to answer your question about root, the word here used is ben. Okay, that means the big root of the tree. So I think it's in many places, not only this one, especially in the so-called Greek learning. Okay, that's another standard text. You will find out if you pay attention on everything, you will find out that's not only in Confucianism, also in the Taoism, every school, they all work from the fundamental to top. Everything have built the root, the foundation, and then going up. Whenever they say the root is rotten, the root is not stable, that means you are wrong. So I think that's very strong concept in Chinese logic basis, from the root to the top.
Thank you, Jason. Next up is going to be Kevin.
Yes, thank you. I go follow whatever the previous talk about. Beng also is this word is ideogram. It's a tree with its bottom. You see that word if highlighted. I'm going to post it here quickly. One joke basically. Yeah. Oh, okay. Aman. Yes. Thank you so much. And basically add one line from that's a root, how the tree grows. Without that ground sign, how can it grow, right? They can understand what's a beng. That's why it's so important. Other thing I want to about the xiao, right? Xiao, the current practice also, I'm not sure that Taiwanese, when my dad passed away, I wear armband with that word, xiao. So, and it's very important. And also about the Dao, I would say lots of words, we miss this word. For example, we translate xiao with filial piety. That's the xiao Dao, 2 words, xiao plus Dao. Another important word in this passage also ren, ren Dao. So to go to more example for the Dao about the Shi Dao. That's mean what's the English code? Is I'm going to put the English, then you guys know it. I translate from Google. Yeah, It's esophagus. We call it when food going through. We call it 食道, food 道. Another 呼吸道, when breath. Like another 道, it's respiratory tract. Also related to water, so also 下水道. So many 道. What we believe is something other human control of something we don't understand, but universally, or we could call something unknown. They just work like that. That's why. And by the way, I would consider Confucius one application of the Tao, the Jing from Kunzi. That's, you can understand it that way. That's one of 10,000 things, Ranka. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Margarita.
Yes, thank you. I think I remember this, how my mom parented me back home. I think I need to learn how to obey and respect parents at home, because that's what they expect for me to do, to respect elderly outside of my house. So it's also show how important the early parenting like practices at your home in order to be able to transfer it outside. But my question is, in this verse, I think it's difficult to find such person. So what happened in this time? Why do people do not uphold the roots? What is the context of this saying from Master Yu? Yeah, thank you.
Amon?
So Margarita is asking about context, and that was a great segue for this little mnemonic that I often used with students. 200, 100, 50, 20, 7, 2, 1. That's a rough breakdown of the amount of states that existed between the spring autumns period through the warring states to the final unification of China. So when Confucius was writing at the end of the Zhou, the Western Zhou, he was writing at a time when the writing was kind of on the wall. He was very prescient in seeing how this was going to break apart. And it wasn't that there was a great unified China. There were 200 independent little states that were at least nominally paying respect to the overall king, the emperor of the Zhou, not called the emperor at that time. What was happening was people were, one, forgetting their place. Two, tensions were rising and people were more mobile than before. And three, because of all that tension, people would migrate and leave home and go abroad and neglect the family. They'd go in search of fame and fortune. The very next passage actually kind of intimates at this, that there were people for whom making a show of their value to be taken in by others and have lavish rewards heaped upon them, that was an occupation that appealed to everyone. And Confucius wanted nothing to do with that. He found that to be just abhorrent. It not only was a violation of your filial duties to care for the root, the place from which you came, but it was also just a game of showmanship. It was vapid, and it was contributing to this decadence and decay of the society, in his opinion. So that offers a little context, and you'll get a glimpse of that in 1.3.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Amon. Just one comment. I really find it fascinating how Confucius is connecting abstract, like Ren, with your interaction with your parents, and then connecting it to society at large. So he's kind of continuously taking like an abstract making it almost at a family level, and then raising it into society level. So I love this play between kind of abstract and different scales. Jason.
Yeah, here's I'd like to just respond to what the Shrinkan talked about this one. I think that you other than Will mentioned about the root, another logic we can pay attention is so-called the moral reasoning, right? Especially in Confucius, the moral reasoning is from family to society to the country. That's the organic growth, okay? And he reject, okay, at this moment, he doesn't use metaphysical or logic to do it, unlike Western philosophy, moral teaching, more on the clear-cut metaphysical, this kind of thing. So that's a totally different approach for the moral reasoning. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. So we have covered our first R, and I think we are off to a fantastic start. I think
so just 1 minute. I'd like to share one thing when you talk about, I think it's probably, some people probably already see that, but not everyone. I'd like to share this screen. Hold on. Did you see the map?
Yes.
Okay, so just like what Aman said, I think Aman is too conservative. We talk about 200, probably over 200, probably 1,000. No, but actually, historians never agree on how many states during that time. Okay, at least many hundreds. So during Confucius' time, probably has 200 states. And you can see after Confucius is about 500 BC, after 100 years, you only have a 7 state. Okay, so you can imagine what kind of thing happened during this 100 years for, let's say, 200 states to 7 states. What's going on? Okay, and after another 200 years, become 1 state. Okay, so you can see what kind of change it happened.
Wonderful, thank you, thank you. So I think we're off to a fantastic start. I think everything that we have done on Dao De Jing is helping us. The community that you build, the great things that Jason and Amon bring, I think it's just working. And I think this format, I thought it would take several meetups to get it going, but it's looking like we are off to a fantastic start. All right, let's go to 1.3. If you'd like to read it, go ahead and type R in the chat. Okay, who would like to read it? We're going to start with Joe, followed by Margarita. Joe.
The master said, fine words and insinuating appearance are seldom associated with true virtue.
Thank you. Margarita.
The master said, those of crafty words and ingratiating expression are rarely ran.
Thank you. Jason.
Okay, it's very short. The master said, eloquent speech and ingratiating manner are nothing to do with ren. Okay, almost the same as Margarita. Margarita talked about. Basically, this one is a negative definition of ren instead of in the Confucius, in the Analects, they have this probably 100 times Confucius try to define what's ren, and none of them are the same. Okay, so never have a clear definition. This one is one famous, the negative definition. Okay, what is not ren? Okay, if you talk too much, that's why you find out the most of the Chinese don't talk too much, because that's not ren. If you talk too much, use beautiful words, that's not ren. And the facial expression, right? You should not like, ingratiating. Okay, that's the manner you should not have. So that's this one is a famous saying. Most of people know this.
Wonderful. If you'd like to comment on this, please go ahead and type exclamation mark. Amon.
Yeah, I think this very terse stanza does a good job of summarizing the very high bar, the very high standard Confucius had for his students, for himself, and for humankind. Was you need to have substance. You cannot just be show. You cannot just be, appearance and fancy words. If it isn't something substantive, it's not really of any value. And I also think it's worth noting at this point, Confucius has spoken, Yao Tzu has spoken, or Yao Tzu has spoken, and now Confucius has spoken again. And so you're starting to get the sense that this is not only does he espouse an idea of human plus two, or man and two, that learning is a collaborative effort, humanity is a collaborative effort, the text is a collaborative effort. It is not just his voice you will hear him engaging with others. So by example, he's demonstrating what he's espoused already. Real learning will happen this way, and not through just my didactic sort of speech or prattling.
Wonderful, beautifully put. Thank you, Amon. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, this is one where this very much reminds me of the Tao throughout it. The idea that, it's your deeds, it's not your words that actually define who you are. And there are several verses that I can think of. 17 is one, but 62 I think is another. And I mean, just throughout the Tao, you kind of see a constant theme of where people are, words are not sufficient. Your actions are actually define you, who you are. And so I think that this is powerful as well. And as Amon had said, it's a very it's a high bar too, because then, it takes it away from just speaking. You just actually have to go out and do things in the world.
Wonderful. Next up is Amon.
Yeah, Joe's comment actually brought something else to mind that I think is very telling here. If we think of this in terms of how we'd hear it, the first time we hear Confucius speak, it's in this very sort of lofty, ideally, learning and applying. Is there anything better? Friends come from afar. And this time it's put up or shut up. And so the tone changes drastically. And you get that a lot through the Analects, where it does feel like he is inconsistent at times, where his message and his tone don't always seem to gel. And I think that if, again, we put on that lens of looking at this like a classroom, the student he's engaging with changes how the lesson may be presented. And so there's an example where he tells, I think it's Zai Wei, one of his students, says, "Am I ready?" And he basically says, "No, and you need to go back and study." And another person comes to him kind of trepidatiously and says, "Am I ready?" And he's like, "Yeah, go ahead." And somebody calls him on it. "Why did you give these two people the exact opposite advice?" He said, "Well, because Zai Wei is full of vim and vigor and rushes in headlong, and he needs to be reined in. Whereas this other student is a little too trepidatious and a little too timid, and he needs the push." And just in that, you get this image or this idea of a teacher who is brilliantly sensitive to his students' needs and trying to orchestrate his lessons to speak to them as individuals. And that accounts for some of the inconsistency in tone, and even sometimes the inconsistency, it seems, in message. But if you look with that uniting theme of a teacher caring for his students, I think the whole text holds together very well.
Thank you, Amon. Jason.
Yeah, I agree, you know, and then I just like what Amon said, that's important to keep in mind who you speak to, but this one has no audience. So actually we don't know, we don't know what you talk. I kind of guess he speak to one of Zigong, okay, who is eloquent, okay. So I kind of guess, but there's no evidence, so.
I want to build on what Amon said. Amon, go ahead first.
Oh, I was just going to say Zugong makes sense. He was the other one I was thinking of. There's a cast of characters, and it's almost like a Shakespearean play where when you know the characters, Zegong is the troublemaker, and Zai Wei is the absolute worst student he has. And I think it's Yin Wei who is hands down his favorite, and he makes no bones about it. And you get just this lovely sort of ensemble of characters that you start to understand why the lessons are geared the way they are the more you read it.
Wonderful. So what I wanted to say is that we've been studying kind of different ages, the oral age, the scribal age, and the print age. This is very much from the scribal age, where you engage with the text in the oral context. So you have, and that goes back into the text. So what you have is that you have this entire symphony of people trying to grapple with the material in their own way. And what it produces is this very rich music, sometimes, notes that stick out, but nevertheless, it's really fascinating human artifact of this going between speech, between almost like full, you can actually see sometimes characters of these students through these words. You can see, okay, this person is a little bit lazy, this person is a little bit, impetuous, so you kind of get all of that. And that adds to the richness of all of these people are trying to, grapple with the same nature, same lesson, but in different ways. So I think that's a fantastic point. Next up is Brian, followed by Marilyn. Brian.
In this case, it's me. I'll talk a little.
Penny, go ahead.
So my nose is still very plugged. I just thought it was interesting that when you look at like 1.2 at the end, he was saying that filiality and respect for elders, aren't those the roots of Ren? And then it seems to me this is kind of like a clarification then, that when he comes in and he says, well, but, crafty words and ingratiating expressions aren't Ren. So if you're acting very pious or respectful, but you really aren't, then that's not Ren.
Thank you. Thank you, Penny. Next up is Marilyn.
Yes, I was wondering if those here who know more than I do could talk a bit about Confucius's students. I had read, for example, that one was incredibly poor. I think it was his favorite. And why they were studying with him and what sorts of positions they went on to have.
Great question. All right, Jason.
I can.
Amon,
go ahead.
Amon, go ahead.
Amon, you want to say? Did you go?
Yeah, I could say a little bit, but so just a little bit on literary criticism here. Nothing in the Analects was written from Confucius, and odds are probably not written from his students. You're talking about, at best, decades after his students wrote something down, and then their students were probably the ones who actually compiled this. So we have this real sort of gulf between who these figures actually were and what they actually did. But for example, all of them were on this quest to land government positions and be men of letters, men of recognition, like he had been on that quest his whole life as well. And when he really wasn't successful at it, he did what any great teacher does and passes the buck. I think it was Zhongyi who was the one. He said that boy's going to die badly, and sure enough, he landed a job working for one of the small states and was caught up in a rebellion and died badly, like the man said. Yinhui, his absolute golden boy student that he adored more than anyone, died very young, and he overgrieved by the estimation of even his own students. Excuse me. But when asked about him, he basically, by someone, he said, Yinhui was better than either of us. And it's very unusual to ever hear a teacher ever acknowledge that a student has surpassed them. That's not something that often would come out of the lips of somebody like that. Excuse me. You get generations who revered him. The why is still somewhat elusive because he wasn't successful, but his philosophy, his teachings resonated and it drew a gathering. There were people who knew that there was something of substance to this man, and at least he was consistent with his words. And apparently his teachings took so well that, incidentally, that young man who died in the rebellion, the story in another text says that after they had stabbed him with glaives, they accidentally cut the string to his hat, and he said a junzi wears his hat and put it back on and tied it before he died. So his master's lessons stuck with him that deeply. You get hundreds of years out before you get people like Mozi and Shunzi and others who do a lot to propagate the teachings of Confucius. And we know a bit more about, and they were a bit more successful than he was. So there's a whole lineage. I mean, in the Alfred Whitehead sort of idea that all of Western philosophy are footnotes to Plato, it's not an exaggeration to say all of Chinese philosophy, culture, music, learning, art, institutions are footnotes to Confucius.
Thank you, Mon. Jason.
Yeah, let me talk a little bit, just respond to Madeline's question about his student. Okay, let's look at this one. Okay, if you think about Buddha had the 10 major disciples, and then there was 2,500 followers. Okay, that's the Buddha's situation. Talk about Jesus had 12 disciples. Okay, and then they have some purpose to follow as a religious leader. You talk about Socrates. They surrounded with a lot of different people, ask a kind of weird question. And Confucius, they have many so-called disciples, but how do we understand this disciple? I think on the first thing, they use the word peng. Most of the translation called friend, but I kind of call it follower. Follower may not be the right word. I think they should be like party member because they are political purpose. Because Confucius is thinking about his idea to save the world. Okay, he has some. So if you think about like a party, and he has a party member, so this disciple probably party member. So they join Confucius because they want to get a job, to the government job, to exercise what Confucius teaches. So I think that's the idea. So if you look at the spectrum of Confucius' student, Yanhui, okay, the very poor student, died early. Zilu, okay, is only 9 years younger than Confucius, and he kind of served as Confucius' bodyguard. When Confucius travel around, he always around. Okay, Zigong, okay, is one very rich, okay, Confucius' disciple. He financed Confucius' the trip. Okay, so there's many different kinds, and some are very old, some are very young, like Zhengzi, Zheng Shen. Okay, next verse we are going to read. He probably 40 years younger than Confucius, because his father also Confucius student, follower. So that's wide spectrum. I think that's what I think, and I have the reason to believe they all have purpose. They want to get a job and then to do what they want to do. I think that's the reason, you know.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jason. Let's go to number 1.4. Who would like to read? Go ahead and type a R in the chat. We'll start with Joe.
The philosopher Tsang, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, said, I daily examine myself on 3 points, whether in transacting business for others, I may have not been faithful, whether in intercourse with friends, I may have been not sincere, whether I may have not mastered or practiced the instructions of my teacher.
Thank you. Next up is Amon, followed by Will. Amon.
Yeah, I'm going to read the same one if I can get my screen to switch. Oh, sorry, it's a night of technical difficulty. Master Zhong said, I examine my person and conduct every day in 3 ways. First, in my interactions with others, have I done all that I can? Second, when dealing with friends and peers, have I managed to keep my word? Finally, have I reviewed and acted upon what I have learned?
Wonderful. Will.
Master Zing said, every day I examine myself on 3 things. In serving others, have I not been wholehearted? In holding relationships with my friends, have I not been trustworthy? Have I not practiced what was transmitted to me?
Thank you. Jason.
Okay, so this one I have some disagree with most of the translation. Okay, and then let me state my reason. Okay, so first, Zhengzi is one of the youngest student or follower for Confucius. So we call Zi because he's a student. Okay, write it down what Zhengzi said. Okay, remember that's not Confucius said, that's Zhengzi said. And famously, Zhengzi being considered the youngest and probably most so-called no talent, stupid student. Okay, keep in mind this one. And stupid doesn't mean bad because you are not talented or you are not so smart. You keep every single word your teacher telling you. So probably he preserved the original teaching without the personal interpretation on that. So remember this person's personality. He's not that smart, and Confucius so many times, you know, I blame on him. Okay, so we will see later. So he talked about 3 things. So remember, he's very young, probably 40, I forget, probably 40 years of younger than Confucius. So when Confucius died, he's still very young. So when he doing this, you know, he must be much older, okay, because he already have a student. Let's put this one in the background. So that's his student. Write down what Zhengzi said. Zhengzi said, each day I examine myself in 3 ways. In doing things for others, have I not been faithful? In my interaction with friends, have I not been trustworthy? Have I not practiced what I taught? 3 things, okay? I think that the last one is different from most of the translation, okay? Most of the translations say, do I review what I learned from my teacher? And I believe this interpretation is wrong because he already been a teacher, okay? So he is not review what teacher taught him, Okay, so that's the first thing I disagree. So I think he meant in the word 传不习乎, that means when I teach, do I really teach what I practice? I'm not just vain talking. I'm doing what I'm teaching, what I'm doing. And another reason is look at the logic. The first thing he talked about, have I not been, three negative questions, right? First, am I not being faithful when I'm doing business? He's talking about dealing with his superior. When you're doing the job, serve your boss. Am I faithful? Then second thing, he talked about the person, his peer, friend. Okay, am I trustworthy? Then he talked about people, his inferior, his student. When I teach my student, do I teach what I have been practiced? So I think it logically makes sense because your superior, your peer, your inferior. So I think that make the whole thing meaningful on this one. Yeah, that's what I need to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Comments, please. Comments, questions. Go ahead and type exclamation mark. We'll start with Amon.
Yeah, I don't disagree with Jason. I think that it's very telling that this first introduction to Zhengzi is after he is a master. He's got that honorific Zi after his name, because when he, Zheng Yi or Zheng He, he is lazy and stupid and a problem child. And I actually thought about it when Marilyn was asking, what did these people go on to do? There's actually, I believe, a story about him napping during the day and Confucius being so enraged. Not only is he enraged and disappointed in his student, he changes his outlook on all of humanity, because he can't trust these people to do what they say. He has to actually observe their actions. And here you hear the echoes of those browbeaten lessons in Zhengzi when he is a master, still evaluating himself. Okay, did I live up to this? Did I live up? But if you look at those lessons, faithful with friends, with my superiors, we see the same values reiterated in a new way. Ren, Xiao, and a new concept is slightly added here with the idea of trustworthiness. But that is a reiteration of, do you have substance? Is what you're saying authentic? You're not just glitz and glamour and glib words. And so the lessons that we've already been introduced to are starting to trickle into the narration in yet another way. But now we're seeing sort of the epilogue of one of his worst students, now that he's in his best place, still knowing the master's lessons, still evaluating himself in this way. And that's why I think it makes a good bookend to sort of an introduction. Here's how powerful the master's teachings are, because they'll stay with you throughout. You don't necessarily know that at this point because you've just met him, but as you get to meet him more, and then you realize, wait, this is that same guy? What happened to him? Why did he looks like a complete, screw up? Well, he was, but he was a screw up who had the greatest master any student could ever hope for, and it changed who he was. I think this is going to be a really fun endeavor. It's different than the Tao Te Ching in that there's more depth to plumb here in some ways. I guess the way I'd say is the Analects make you work for it a little more. Not that there aren't the same depths to plumb, but you have to work a little harder for it. I'm going to be leaving. I will hope to see you all next week. And yes, Jason, I'll go to the doc and offer my 2 cents as this process goes on. But I wanted to say thank you all and good night.
Thank you, Amon.
Thank you, Amon. It's always
Thank
a
you,
pleasure.
Amon.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Kevin. Joe.
Yes. So thank you, Mon. And I agree with his assessment that this is going to be a lot of fun. It is going to be different than the Tao, though. This seems a little bit more intense. When I read this passage, I mean, I started to think about how.
Joe, can I interrupt you for just a second?
Sure.
Let's ask Jason this question. How is Analects going to be different from the Tao, the experience of going through it?
Yeah, it's very different. I just have to say it's very, okay, Tao is, I think you all probably already see the difference, okay? You already see the difference. Yeah, you already see the difference. So first thing, Tao has no speaker, no audience, you have to guess. Confucius, usually you have it, okay? Tao is talking about something others' word, not that practical. Confucius is very, very practical. Everything is practical. And one thing I want to keep, I interpret both are political writing. Not everybody agree, but I consider both are political writing. But Tao's answer is very vague, talking about like, stay away. Confucius' answer is moral answer. Everything is about moral, okay? And I will say Tao is naturalist and is metaphysical answer, but Confucius is moral answer. When I ask you how to, for example, like I ask Sri Lanka, how can I make more money? Sri Lanka say, yes, be filial piety with your parents, be nice with your friend. Okay, that's the answer he's doing. Yeah.
Wonderful. I also see it as being kind of focused on nature, predominantly focused on nature versus predominantly focused on culture. Joe, please continue.
Yeah, I look at it as yes, being focused on order, and how to act in the world. This is the distinction that I'm seeing as opposed to, and I get a much more yang feeling to this reading as opposed to, it seems like the feminine is just not even acknowledged. But when I looked at this passage, it actually reminded me of, some of the Stoic practices. But I think it's really about how our social interactions in the world that he's talking about, because he's asking you to review them to make sure that they're in accordance with his teacher's principles. And there's an element of justice in that. So I think that that's that's an important part, because there's this idea also of self-mastery that exists in this text, that you're trying to manage yourself in this process. And this is one of those 3-step processes that you can do, where you're actually reflecting inward to see if you're meeting the standards set out by your teacher. There's also an element of discipline as well. That's very clear here. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Joe. Kevin, can I start by asking you the same question? How is considered different from Lao Tzu?
Do you remember the title for Dao? This is 2 keywords. One is Dao, another is De. There's 2 sections, right? This is about section 2, most focus. De, virtual person, virtuous person. How to be a good person, 君子. So, and also one day I'm gonna bring maybe Jason can bring one day Confucius see the Lao Tzu. Then after that, you see that scenario, how he respect Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu is like a dragon, a good way of dragon. Okay, it's like me, it's like some bird. You can see, because of Confucius Analects focus on a human relationship and order, like judgment. Yeah. And for this one, actually, I didn't comment on the last chapter, very connected too. The last chapter talk about try not to value eloquent the words, and yeah, then focus what's it's not a regular Zen, which kindness. So it's very similar to Dao, if you see it. And here, even more further from the Zhenzi, it's maybe last student of Confucius or old, at least old, the age gap about 46 years old. His grandfather like a Kunz. And he said, I'm going to self-examination my 3 times, 3 ways, or more than 3 ways could be understand. 3 is, could be understand 3 plus. And they talk about how do you work with others. They use Chinese word 忠, loyalty. Modern days, we could be use contract to keep your loyalty. And another work with your friends and all your followers. They use the trust. So we need to trust each other. And how do you learn from others, from teachers? You need to practice. So one thing key here is normally our modern days, sadly, we say our day is different than old days. We forget the history, we forget the previous, like visual innovative creativity. So, but we, by history, by timeline, we connected. We learn from the previous. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Jason.
If I give Marilyn as talk first.
Oh, sure. Marilyn followed by Jason.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Well, thanks, Kevin. That was a very neat way to put it, that this is about the de, that it's human relations and not cosmology. I was thinking about what the point Joe raised, which is it seems very young, and where's the yin? I think that the yin is everywhere. If you are the son in relation to your father, you're in a yin position. The father is in a yang position related to you, but in terms of his own father or his superior work, he's in a yin position. So that the whole thing, there's still a whole interplay going on. It's just not put in those terms, really.
Thank you, Marilyn. Next up is Jason.
Yeah, I just like to another way to explain the different Tao, okay, between Taoism and the Confucianism, okay, the different. If we start to think about in the Greek world, right, in the Western world, how does Diogenes, the cynic, and the Stoic, okay, they both have the relationship. They are looks opposite, but they are from the same source. They both of them try to conform with the nature. But if you define nature is outside your city, you are Diogenes, okay, the cynic. But if you define the nature is your civilization, you have to conform with your civilization, you are Stoic. Same as Taoism and the Confucianism, right? If you conform with the great nature, you are Taoism. If you conform with the great society, you are Confucianism. So you can see they are the same, but they are opposite. Same as if you look at Diogenes, the cynic, and the Stoic. Okay, that's the relationship.
Wonderful, thank you. Let's do one last one. This is going to be 1.5. Who would like to read? Go ahead and type R in order to read. I'm going to start with Joe. Let's go with Marco first. Marco.
The master said, to guide a state great enough to possess 1,000 more chariots, be attentive to affairs and trustworthy, regulate expenditures and treat persons as valuable, employ the people according to the proper season.
Thank you. Next up is Joe, followed by Penny. Joe.
The master said, to rule a country of 1,000 chariots, there must be a reverent attention to business and sincerity, economy and expenditure, and love for men, and the employment of the people at the proper seasons.
Thank you. Penny.
This translation I have right in my hand is the same as Marco read, so.
That's all right. Go ahead.
Okay. The master said, to guide a state great enough to possess 1,000 war chariots, be attentive to affairs and trustworthy. Regulate expenditures and treat persons as valuable. Employ the people according to the proper season.
Thank you. Next up, Jason.
Okay, I think this one is probably easy. Okay, so whenever Confucius talk about a 1,000 chariot, okay, so that means a large state. Okay, large state. So remember the map I showed. Okay, during that time, they have the largest state. They call the 1,000 chariot. If 100 chariot, that's a small state. So usually that's the word Confucius used. So the master said, to rule a country. Okay, to rule a country of thousands of chariot, that means large state, be dedicated to affairs and be trustworthy, regulate expenditure and care of people, and draft, employ the people according to the proper season. I don't want to misunderstand as employ people. Here we talk about drafting system because during that time, it's not employed means hire people, pay salary. No, that means you draft the people. So that's important. Confucius is teaching when you draft people, even that's their obligation, you can draft according to season because agriculture, right? You don't do it when they are busy. You ask them to work for government when they are not busy. So I think that's important. And another thing is a minor thing. Most of the translation call it love people, but I think I have another discussion in the Asian philosophy group. I think the love, this word I, during the ancient time, usually means care of instead of love. That's my understanding. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Folks, if you would like to make a comment or have a question, go ahead and type exclamation mark. Start with Marilyn.
Yes, well, everything except for the last phrase sounds incredibly like Lao Tzu. The last phrase is, as I understand it, I'm just going to add to what Jason said. They had corvée labor, which was a type of forced government labor that's been done in many places around the world, where, for example, part of what built the Incan Empire in Peru was they had corvée labor. Everyone had to go and do government service, building a wall, building a road. So there was a disadvantage, which was that you got pulled from your life and went to go do this work. The advantage was that people from somewhat different areas came together. So it knitted together the larger society. So this advice to a ruler here is really about, don't take people out from the fields in the middle of the harvest. Time the labor, time everything that you're taking people away from so that you're not sort of wrecking normal life with your demands as a ruler.
Thank you. Thank you, Marilyn. All right. Anybody else has any comments? At this point, you can make the comment on the entire experience of going through Analects. What do you think? How I think this is, we are, I think, off to a great start. I think the format has come together very well. Joe, what do you think of the format? And Jason, what do you think of the format?
I like the format. I think that this is it feels a little bit more intense. than the Tao. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be a really interesting experience. It's going to have a different feeling each week. You know, and I would say it's better or worse. I'm just going to say that it's going to be different. And so, yeah, I'm looking for, I think the format is fantastic. I think that, you know, going through it like this makes it easy to capture what each verse is saying. And so it's easy to take notes on this and to really kind of, you know, and everybody's comments tonight have been real excellent as far as the clarification of the text, and specifically in capturing the one thing that we've really been able to capture here tonight are the times for which this was written and the conditions for which this was written under. So it's a much tighter text with less interpretation, I feel like. So that also makes it a little bit easier, but it is more intense. It's a lot more intense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that partly goes with the subject itself. The Tao is about nature, so there is a peacefulness to the Tao. You're trying to be like water, whereas here you're trying to say, how can you be a dutiful son? That's not exactly like water, so it will have a different feel, and I think there is a difference in feel of the philosophy itself and what is being talked about, how it is being talked about, and all of that, you know, seeps into the difference between the two. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, no, I think that there's something every time I came to the Tao and I felt like really connected to everybody, and it was really not that I don't hear, but there is I felt relaxed coming into the Tao. It was about nature. It was just something that would be, you know, that would come out, and everybody had their own perspectives and different readings. Here, I feel like almost it's a rigid Stoic exercise. And so that's what we're kind of, and that's that feels a little bit different. So my Tuesdays were always like really relaxed, and now they're just going to be a little more intense. That's all.
Jason, what do you think?
In a good way.
I think it's probably, it's interesting because at the beginning I'm very surprised. Everybody talk about it, especially Joe talk about intense. I think, come on, how come it's intense? That's and right now I understand, you know, it's intense because right now it's remind you what you need to do to your parents, what you need to do when you are working. So okay, so I think that's the probably that means intense. So I think that probably we should do is one verse of Analects, one verse of Tao Te Ching, and switch around. So, but anyway, I think that's, and I really like to see how you more on the how you read. Just look at the text and what do you learn from this, or what do your reaction on this? For example, that doesn't make sense, okay, or something wrong here. I think that's also important. I think just like when we read a different cultural things, we all have this kind of response. And
okay, let's do one thing. Just to make it interesting and to connect the Tao Te Ching with it, how about we bookmark this meetup with somebody reading one of the verses of Tao Te Ching in the beginning, no discussion, just as an introduction, and one at the end, because that would be a right way to kind of to bookmark it, and then do the discussion in the middle. Joe, what do you think?
I very much like that. Another idea could be, if she's willing to do it, have Margarita read it in Bahasa. That would actually, it brings a certain, I don't know, lightness to the conversation. But yeah, I agree. Bookending it would be fantastic.
Wonderful. I think
I probably will be vote against this idea. You know, okay. I kind of thinking about during this section. I kind of feel like, come on, you guys should read this one first, then read Tao Te Ching, because right now I have to spend so much time to tell you that's a different thing. So I don't know, but that's a kind of.
How about this? How about a compromise? How about ending it with a Tao verse?
Okay, that's fine.
Because that would be a good way of kind of ending.
And anybody can choose the Tao
Somebody
verse
can
you want to
choose
use.
something at the end. Okay, very good.
No comment. We just read it. Yeah.
No comments. Yeah, no comments. It will be like poetry. Okay, it's like poetry. Let's see. Will, you are next.
I think as we get into it, as I remember, and I'm no expert, but I think a lot of the Analects is about flexibility, and but I just like that first verse is not is I think a very happy verse, and so maybe to start with that first verse will add some levity.
I want to say that, like, when I actually see all these students talking, I think there is a kind of a, what shall I say? There is a laughter there. There is like this interestingness of actual people trying to grapple with things that I find really fascinating. So I don't see it as grim. I see it as very much human. Of these people trying to say, okay, what should I do, and what are the human, what are the kinds of things that human are prone to do, and how do you deal with that? Let's see.
I have a suggestion here. I think that probably we read it a little bit differently. Okay?
Yes.
So when we read this one, I will kind of think about just don't read as Confucius talking to you. Okay. Read as you watch a movie and the Confucius talking to his student. And when there's no student there, you just think about the Confucius is monologue. Okay, so not let Confucius talk to you, and then you will not feel the intense on that, because partly remind you, oh, that's not the way I treat my parents. Okay, so I think that will then they come after, And
Wonderful. Next up is Margarita.
Yeah, hi. I definitely feel the change. Maybe psychologically saying, there will be a period where we feel unsure or not feeling comfortable enough because we are transitioned from one to another thing. And that's normal. It's okay. Probably about 1 to 3 sessions, we're going to feel that, to kind of miss what we had before. But I think to this, I agree with Jason. Confucianism is a different perspective. So when we mix it, perhaps we can't really stay true with the text. And I agree, there's certain different perspective into understanding this different text. I feel with Tao Te Ching, I introspect the text. So I get something from it. So I explore the text. But with Analects, it's quite prescriptive, yet it's a metacognitive process. So by reading the text, actually you're mirroring yourself. So that's probably, some of us may feel a bit heavy. I suggest this heaviness, let's limit, because you see, even though it's like short text, however, this is metacognition. You think about your thinking. So perhaps 6 to 8, that's too much, because your brain absorb new things and think about yourself, whether I'm really doing it. That's perhaps a bit too much. Maybe the first 3 sessions, just limit that for like a fewer number, perhaps that will give us more time to feel relaxed into talking about how we feel, how we think about the Analects verses. Yeah, that's from me. Thank you.
Thank you. So a couple of things. I think great observations. So kind of comparing Tao Te Ching with this, Tao Te Ching is poetry. It's pure poetry. It's just beautiful metaphors of nature and inspiring. This is prose. I mean, I see a dramatic difference of just formulation of it. And the second thing is that I think the meetup format we have of just doing a 2-hour meetup, and we will not try to hurry up and try to fit in more or try to stretch it in trying to keep it for too long. So we'll just do whatever we can in 2 hours, and we will continue with that. I think that has worked really well for us across all, all, whether it is Tao Te Ching or Bhagavad Gita or Gospel of John. I think that strategy of just letting people take their time. Sometimes what will happen is that we'll cover only a few. Sometimes we'll cover more. It depends on the material, all of it. So that's how I'm thinking about it. Let's see. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Penny. Joe.
You could skip me. Actually, I think
Sure.
that. Thank you.
Penny.
I just wanted to say, I thought it would be nice if, I know Kevin had read one of them in Chinese, that could be something that would be nice, like start out with hearing the verse in Chinese. And that would be kind of a connection to, when it was first written and the whole culture. And then we could give the readings in English and then Jason's. I think that would be a nice way to do it.
Excellent. Well, what do you think, Jason?
I think that's fine, if people like to hear in Chinese.
Yeah, I think it makes a difference. I mean, probs for somebody who doesn't know Chinese, does know Chinese, probably doesn't make that big a difference. But for, I think most people, including me.
Yeah, the big difference, that's probably the personal bias, because I think Chinese is less oral than tradition than Indian. So the sound again, that's just personal. The sound probably doesn't make that much sense. Okay, because you think about the geographic area, the people from northern, south, and west, they probably read even they speak Mandarin, they probably sound very different because of the accent. And during that time, definitely they are not speaking Mandarin. They probably speaking more close to my dialogue than today's Mandarin.
So do you want to read in Chinese?
I can read it. Kevin can read, and probably we can use different voice.
Sure. Okay. I think that's a good idea, having the Chinese, because it adds actually. It's just a different experience. I think it makes the experience richer. I've noticed
it's very short, so
exactly.
we can read in many different ways. So
right. I've noticed that in Bhagavad Gita, when Yogeshwar reads it in Sanskrit, everybody loves it because it's different. Joe, what do you think?
I think I agree. I agree with that. 100% fully.
All right, folks, if there are any more comments, looks like there are none. So I think, so Jason, I'm just delighted that you and Amon are doing this. This is just great, because you can't really understand Chinese culture without Confucian.
I think so. I think I think probably Chinese don't have to read it because you grown with that. Your parent already practice in this way. So you probably don't have to read it. But if you want to understand not only Chinese, I think the entire Japan, Korean, even in I can hear from Margarita's culture, even have some influence on that. So it's probably important for the people outside this culture to read it, and again for the people in this culture also helpful to read it, because you will help you understand who you are. So.
Wonderful. So folks, I want to tell you about the meetups coming up. Tomorrow, I'm going to do a meetup on mapping MBTI, diagrammatically. So I'm going to draw different types and different relations between different functions. I'm going to connect that with all the ideas of Carl Jung, not all the ideas, some of the core ideas of Carl Jung. So that's going to be tomorrow, Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern time. Thursday and Friday, we do Bhagavad Gita. All of this is on 52 Living Ideas. So if you're not a member of 52 Living Ideas, please join. On Saturday, Yasuhiko Kimura is going to be back. And he's going to be talking about the new spirituality for the future. And the theme this time is heal yourself and heal the world. What is the connection between healing yourself and healing the world? His conversations are just incredible. So don't miss that. All right. So, and Jason, what are you doing this Saturday?
Oh, this Saturday, I think it's a good about Confucianism. Okay, because if eventually we finish the warring state, we are going to the Han Dynasty, which is so-called eclecticism, right? Eclecticism, kind of use Confucianism as the main philosophy and collect all the yin-yang school, Taoism, and legalism all put together to serve the big empire. So that's a little bit change, you know.
Wonderful. So that's going to be on Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern time. I'll be announcing it shortly. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you very much, Joe and Jason and Amon. Bye, everybody.
Nice
Thank you.
next week. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
See you.
Nice to see
thank
everybody
you.
again.
Good night.